is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 555. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources. And joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, it's a little weird. Kind of miss the two groovin' guys intro. I'm not going to lie. I kind of like
two cool dudes.
The cool cruising dude. I always think about it now because I got used to you interrupting me with it. And now I kind of miss it. What have you done to me?
Yeah, since we're not doing this on Zencastr for the moment, that took away my powerful soundboard capabilities. But you know what? I bet we could figure out a way to incorporate the soundboard into what we're doing here.
Yeah, I'm sure you could.
Like fully incorporate the soundboard.
So this week on the show, we've got one of our set primers. Now, this one is about double masters, which is another of the long line now of Masters reprint sets. And we're going to be talking about it in broad strokes, giving you the information that you need so that if you do decide to do some of these events either online or, one day, God willing, or maybe in the country where you live, perhaps you can do a local draft. Certainly not the case where we're at. But if you do end up joining one of these events one way or the other, you'll have an idea of what's going on. We don't do a full card by card set review for these for a few reasons. Primarily, they're all reprint sets, so there's no new cards to speak of at all. So these are kind of all known quantities, at least on some level. And then the other one is that these are expensive. And so most people will only do a few drafts. Even our listeners who are hardcore limited players, won't necessarily get on and grind draft after draft after draft after draft. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put out like a 6-hour huge lift show for a format that you're only going to play once. But it definitely makes sense for us to take an episode to dedicate to it so that you have an idea of what's going on so that you don't dive in thinking, oh, well, this is a super aggressive format. And it's like, no, it's not. And then your one sweet draft that you had, you threw it away. So that's what we're going to do on the show this week. Before we get into it, though, I want to mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com, and something kind of cool that has popped up over on the CFB business side of things. Affiliate codes. So these are a way for Channel Fireball to know who of the people that they, partner up with are sending them customers and business and things like that. For us, we have one for the podcast. It's just LR. So if you use the affiliate code LR, when you shop at Channel Fireball or when you sign up for CFB Pro, you can actually directly support the podcast that way. So, we've got the Patreon, which of course I'll mention in a minute, but just real quick, it's patreon.com/limited resources to support the show directly. But this gives you another avenue to help support us and the show, and also to show our sponsor Channel Fireball that, that we have some sway in the community, or that you trust us and, that we're sending you to a good place. And all you have to do, it doesn't cost anything or whatever. You just put LR in the affiliate code when you check out or when you sign up for CFB Pro. So, I'm going to ask you to do that. If you're buying anything from Channel Fireball, anytime you do that, if you put in the LR, that will help us out a lot. Like I said, it helps support the show directly in that way. And then also, I want to show CFB that our listeners, are the real deal. And this is the way to do that. Also, this could open up some cool doors down the line for potentially some type of giveaways or something. And then, or maybe some benefits, some bonuses or something like that. I'm going to try to get in the ear of some of the CFB people, namely Luis, and see if we can't work something out for our listeners as well. But for now, this just rolled out. And if you're over at CFB and you're going to order something, use the affiliate code LR, and I would really appreciate it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we just launched this program. We kind of did a soft rollout of the affiliate codes about a month ago, but now we're really getting it going. And there is, like Marshall said, more to come. So we're going to be adding more sweet stuff. We're definitely going to be doing giveaways here at LR, as well as a lot of this kind of CFB content producers are going to be talking about that. So and if we do a good job, maybe we'll keep LR. Maybe I'll stay as the no. LR is not going anywhere. Don't worry about that. But it's a good way to show CFB that you guys love LR. And if you don't mind doing that, that's pretty sweet. I'm excited about the whole program. I think it's a cool way to kind of get people mobilized here. And yeah, like kind of what you said, Marshall. Of course, supporting us via the patreon.com/limited resources is always a great way to directly support the show. And Marshall, of course, puts a lot of cool benefits in there. I hope to one day get access to it, but at press time, I currently am unable to.
Well, if you were a patron, you would be able to submit questions for the Patreon question of the week. And if selected, it would be read on the show and answered by you and I. In this case, though, this one comes from Bobby, who says, LSV, what is it about Vintage Cube that makes it a beloved favorite for you? Do you foresee it ever making its way onto Arena?
So I like Vintage Cube. Well, I love Vintage Cube because it does a combination of things that I really like. It lets you play with some sweet, powerful cards. Obviously, it's fun to put, Black Lotus, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Mana Drain, Crucible of Worlds, Balance, all these like wild cards into your decks. But it also really just has so many different games. There's tons of different archetypes you can draft. The games play out so differently. You just have stuff like, I remember one game I locked my opponent out by using Metamorph copying their Eternal Witness to get back Cryptic Command every turn against their mono green deck.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they didn't have a way to get Witness off the board or counter any of my spells, and they had an overwhelming board presence, but I was able to turn that into a win. And that kind of stuff can be really fun. Assembling combos is really fun. It's just this rich vein of powerful cards, novel situations, and different gameplay and decks and drafting experiences almost every time. Obviously, you see some of the stuff over and over again, but there's so much different stuff. I just really don't get tired of it. I could see it making its way into Arena. They did put power cards onto Arena for one of the special like Theros events. I remember they had Black Lotus in. So presumably they could do this. And I did enjoy the Arena Cube. It wasn't quite the same thing, but it was still a lot of the stuff that makes Cube fun. I just in general tend to love cubes. So yeah, it's a really fun format. If you haven't tried it, check it out. I wrote a couple articles on CFB that you can look for about Cube because I know it's an intimidating format, and we've done a couple episodes here too. So we've got there's some resources, limited or not, to kind of get you up to speed on Cube because it's a high barrier to entry format, but a really rewarding one once you kind of break through that.
Yeah, I view Vintage Cube as kind of the end game for limited players. It is the promised land, right? Like once you feel comfortable drafting core set, you can move up to an expert level set. And once you get used to a few of those, dip your toe into the set we're going to talk about this week, a master set or something along those lines. And then once you feel comfortable with those, try out some cubes, eventually a legacy cube. And then when you get to Vintage Cube, you've kind of gone into the deepest end of the pool. Like that is where it really never gets old. It is many, many limited players' favorite way to play Magic, full stop. And, so anyway, I would hope to see it, by the way, on Arena at some point. I bet you they'll do some version of it. We say the Vintage Cube. When we say that, we mean the one that's on Magic Online because it's kind of the industry standard Vintage Cube. But by no means is it the best one or, can you not change it or whatever. There's, if you go to anybody's house who has a cube, you're going to get different cards and different numbers of cards and all that kind of stuff too. So, getting a Vintage Cube of some sort on Arena, I bet you that'll happen at some point. Okay. Luis, do we want to do the Double Masters Crack-A-Pack that we have here straight away, or do we want to do it after we've talked about the cards? I
think we should probably just do the intro for that, for Double Masters, kind of explain a little bit what it is, then go into the Crack-A-Pack, especially since, well, it's Double Masters. There's a couple weird things going on, so I think that seems like it would make sense.
Okay, so let's do that first then. So let's talk about the set, get everything kind of laid out for you, and then we'll do a Crack-A-Pack after it's over. So broad strokes, Double Masters is a new set from Wizards of the Coast, but it is a reprint set, meaning that every card in it has been printed before in some form or another. This one has 332 cards in it, 91 commons, 80 uncommons, 121 rares, and 40 mythic rares. And these master sets have been printed numerous times now, so we're kind of used to them. They're very powerful. The main, I assume at least, the main function of these master sets is to get hard to get expensive cards into the hands of people that want to play them in constructed, a commander or whatever, get them into their hands where they can, sort of balance out the market when these cards get a little bit too expensive. But also, while you're there, if you're going to be printing a whole bunch of sweet reprints, you need to fill in a lot of gaps if you're going to have a whole set. They decide to make these real gifts for us hardcore limited players, because these sets are some of the most fun, highest level drafting that you can do, generally speaking. And I always look forward to the master sets. And they even threw in, I don't know if this is, I don't know how long in advance they plan these or what the deal is, but boy, this one is just all out. Each pack contains 2 rares and 2 foils minimum, and the foils themselves can be whatever rarity, so they could be rares as well. So there is a scenario where you open up somehow 4 rares in one pack, which is kind of crazy. But also, the foil slots and the extra rare bump out commons, for those seats, or at least they have the potential to in the case of the foils. So these packs are extremely power dense, with rarity bumps. And then on top of the fact that Masters sets already contain a very high density of very powerful synergistic cards, especially for limited players where, sometimes they're putting in mythic rares that are really great for legacy or vintage or something. We get to play with them for a draft here. And as a result, probably just to avoid feel bads, but it certainly has a massive effect on limited as well. They changed the rule where instead of picking 1 card, you actually get to take 2 for your first pick out of each pack rather than just 1. So that is something I've never seen before, in limited, really ever, Luis, where they've changed that rule.
It's awesome because it's the sort of thing when it's one of those things where as soon as I heard about it, I'm like, wow, that is perfect. It's double masters. It's on theme. And when you get double rares, not having to pass any of your rares is sweet. There's also like some seeded combos in there. Like actually my preview cards were Sword of the Meek and Thopter Foundry. And if you open both those cards, you could just snap up both and you're just living on easy street.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's really cool. I actually wonder what it would be like to draft normal sets or other sets with the double first picks. It's possible that would just be really sweet. Mm-hmm. Maybe if it was sometimes the rule, but not always, who knows? But either way, I've really liked it because getting to lock in 2 things from your first pack is really, really cool. And it's every first pick. So you're, pack 1, pack 2, pack 3, you get to double pick. And, yeah, it definitely changes things. It's going to make this Crack-A-Pack more exciting. I know that.
Definitely. And it because I could definitely see scenarios where you take 2 combo cards over where you would have taken an individually more powerful card, or you completely cut the 2 good cards in a given color out of a pack, where, you can just start snapping up all those and try to set yourself up for the second pack, that kind of thing. These are going to be available or are available on Magic Online. You can play Phantom for 10 tickets or 25 tickets for cards that you get to keep. And then in real life, it looks like they're about $15 a pack or so. Again, if this is relevant, if anybody actually can go to a store and play, I would expect to pay somewhere in the $50 US range to draft this. This is no joke. These are very expensive, very high powered packs, but they hopefully have some very desirable and valuable cards inside the packs as well. So, I'll let you figure that out for yourself as you go. But, my guess is that most people that play this set more than once will be playing Phantom Qs on Magic Online for 10 tickets and kind of going to town doing that. Okay. So that's sort of the broad strokes for how the set is laid out and what it's all about. But what about the actual cards and the strategy and stuff in it? How does it look from a big picture perspective?
So kind of the top line is that this set's heavily artifact based. It actually, I think it was going to be Artifact Masters at some point.
I heard that too. Yeah.
Is what I heard. Yeah. So, the artifacts permeate everything. It's actually more comparable or more than like Mirrodin or Scars of Mirrodin in terms of how big of an impact artifacts have.
So huge. Yeah.
So every color except green has artifact synergies and combos. Green is the anti-artifact color, so there's more artifact destruction, like, common Conclave Naturalist, uncommon Reclamation Sage, also Crushing Vines at common, that sort of thing. But basically, you can be expected to draft lots of artifacts. And like you said before, the set's obscenely high power level. I mean, there's just tons of awesome rares. People get double first picks. There's twice as many rares. Commons are pushed out, etc. So when you see stuff like Cast Down at common and a Braid at common, those are good commons. Don't get me wrong, but like those look like eye opener, but they're not even among the best cards in the set. There's just a lot of really, really good cards. So, it's a wild ride from what I've done so far. And kind of before we get into Crack Pack, let's just talk about the kind of color combos and the archetypes, and then we can do the Crack Pack, then jump into kind of the top commons by color, and then some individual notes about the format. So there's kind of two. It's weirdly set up actually, and I like it when they try new stuff, especially with master sets and stuff like this. So there's a couple shards. So there's Esper artifacts. So blue, white, and black have a bunch of interwoven artifact themes where you can be blue, white, or black, blue, and share a lot of the stuff. So there's tons of like tutoring and recursion, like a Sphinx Summoner, blue, black, 3/3 flyer, ETB, search your library for an artifact creature and put it in your hand. And that's an uncommon, it got downshifted from rare. Sanctum Gargoyle at common, 3 and a white, 2/3 flyer, ETB, bring back an artifact from your graveyard. Mirror Retriever at common, 2 colorless, 1/1, when it dies, bring back an artifact from your graveyard. So there's a lot of that stuff. Yeah. They're just going nuts. And Esper, you can be completely Esper. There's a decent amount of fixing. You can be like a blue black deck that's either controlish or aggressive. Same with white blue, can go either way. And then black white, I think, is going to be a little less common than the other two. But Esper is like the artifact shard.
Right. And it's interesting because it looks like they just remember way back in Shards block when Esper first debuted as a shard in a set, they made artifacts that were also colored mana, right? And there was a whole bunch of them that were in that. And it looks like they just pilfered basically all of them. The Thopter Foundry, Time Sieve, Sphinx Summoner, Sharum the Hegemon, Send Triplets. Like all of these cards have, Master of Ethereum, Master Transmuter was from that block as well, Inkwell, Leviathan. So, these were all cards that had a color in their mana symbol, but were also artifacts. And it looks like they just got basically all of them here.
Yeah, and there's a couple different ways to slice this apple with these artifact decks. There's like Tempered Steel, 1 white, all your artifacts creatures get +2/+2. So it just, and Glaze Fiend, the 0/1 flyer that gets +2/+2 whenever you have an artifact ETB. But there's also the massively controlling cards, like you mentioned. Some of those rares go nicely in there. Sanctum Gargoyles, Esper Zoa, 4/3 flyer for 2 and a blue, but during your upkeep you have to return an artifact. So if you have no other artifacts, it comes back. But returning Sanctum Gargoyle over and over again is awesome.
I see Glass Dust Culk is here too.
Really powerful.
Yep.
So the artifact theme has an aggressive deck, a skeleton of an aggressive deck inside it, but I would say is mostly going to be controlling. Okay. And either way, again, quite strong. Like I've seen these artifact decks or played them where your opponent's like, I've got 5 shatters, and you're like, you can shatter my Sanctum Gargoyles all you want, like there's ways to punish that, even if cards like Reclamation Sage are, of course, good.
Right.
Another kind of broad ranging shard is Jund. So red, black, green. And Jund has just a bunch of different sacrifice themed cards. It's on the more aggressive side. There's some Devour cards in here. There's ways to make tokens. A lot of ways to blow up artifacts. And so Jund kind of, there's, every color pair within there is a viable deck as well. This one's it stands out a little less than the artifacts deck, just because artifacts get to like play nice with each other just by having the type artifact. Like Mishra's Bauble's in the set, and some decks really like having Mishra's Bauble. So when you have artifact synergy, it mobilizes any card with the artifact type line, which is a lot more synergistic than Jund, where there's some decks that don't have a sacrifice theme and don't care about the sacrifice cards, and there's some decks that are a controlling sacrifice deck and don't care about the aggressive cards, and it doesn't quite gel to the same degree that Esper does. That said, you can draft all those colors, and then there's a couple 2-color archetypes like green-white tokens. Lots of ways to make tokens and pump them. Red-white has equipment, but also still has the go wide thing. Like Glint Sleeve Artisan is a 2 and a white for a 2/2 Fabricate, which means you either have it come in as a 3/3 or you have it come in as a 2/2 and you get a 1/1 mirror. And that's a good go wide card, right? It's 3 mana for a 2/2 and a 1/1.
Right.
And then there's like blue-green ramp. It has just like tons of like Yavimaya Embrace at uncommon. That's an 8 mana, control magic, steal your opponent's creature and give it +2/+2 and trample. So there's like all these big mana payoffs in blue and green and lots of ways to generate lots of mana. So,
a quick search, by the way, for the equipment. You mentioned briefly the equipment sub theme there. There's 21 cards that include the word equipment on them. I mean, I also just did a quick look when we were talking about the artifacts. There's 103 artifacts in this set. 103. Yeah. That's like a third of the cards in the set.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a third. And part of the reason that the equipment deck works and why there's so much equipment is there's tons of living weapons. So these are the equipment that come in with a 0/0 germ equipped. So you have cards like Sickle Slicer, 3 mana, +2/+2 equipment, 4 to equip. But since it comes in with a germ, it's a 3 mana 2/2 baseline, which means that these decks can play like 7 equipment, but still not run short on creatures as a result. They even have Ancestral Blade, which is 1 and a white. It's a 1/1 equipment, 1 to equip, but comes with a 1/1 soldier. So it's actually like a new living weapon update. And I've definitely gotten mashed by some of these red-white decks that just go very wide and start casting Fortifies and whatnot.
One of my preview cards for this set was Cranial Plating. So there you go.
Oh. Well, Cranial Plating is still a beating, as it turns out. It's not. It's not not a weak card in the slightest.
Yeah, I bet. It's
so
uncommon.
let's get to a Crack-a-Pack. Those are the main archetypes.
Okay.
I mean, you can combine basically any 2 colors and have something going on, but these are like the main groupings.
Okay, so here's our Crack-a-Pack. Unfortunately, I don't have a live pack because they're not here yet, but we do have a generated Crack-a-Pack. So I'll do the commons, the rares, as it were, and then the foils after that. So the first common is Flare Husk, which is 1 mana for an artifact equipment. Its living weapon, as Luis just described, it comes in attached to with a 0/0 black germ creature token, and then this gets attached to it. This one's really simple. The equipped creature gets +1/+1, and it has equip 2. It's interesting because this is not a very, not a super powerful card, but it's not bad. But I find that in these artifact-based sets, sometimes you just need cheap artifacts on the battlefield to enable other artifact synergies, and Flare Husk is probably a card that you could use for that. Otherwise, you probably don't want it. Next is Eager Construct. This is 2 mana 2/2, an artifact creature construct, and when it enters the battlefield, each player may scry 1. So
this is the kind of card you don't really want in your deck unless you really care about your artifact count. Because 2 mana 2/2 with both players scrying 1 is on balance a slight downside. It's not a big downside. It gets pretty close to parity, but you know what? They get to access to the card first, and that actually does matter a tiny amount. But you'll end up playing this card when you end up really needing your artifact count, like you have Tempered Steel or Cranial Plating in your deck.
Right. Next is Golem Skin Gauntlets. This is 1 mana for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each equipment attached to it. So this is so I heard you like equipment. And its equip cost is 2.
Yeah, this card's pretty weak.
It seems bad.
Even in a set full of equipment, it's just there's so much good equipment. Don't play the bad one. And yes, when this is giving +4/+0, you don't need it because it's probably lethal in 1 hit anyway.
Right. The other 3 equipment are already doing its thing.
Yeah.
Next one, I like this card, Ever-Flowing Chalice. 0 mana artifact with multi-kicker 2. You can pay 2 any number of times when you cast it, and for each time you do that, it gets a charge counter on it, and it taps for a colorless mana for each charge counter on it. So you can pay 2 mana to have an artifact that taps for 1, or 4 mana for 2, or 6 mana for 3, etc.
This card got a huge upgrade on Magic Online. It was a card that was famously easy to cast for 0 mana, in which case it does nothing.
Yes.
But they actually give you an extra confirm window now, which is a rare time when I'm in favor of extra confirm windows. I generally don't like them, but in this case, I think it helps a lot. I like Chalice. It's cool that it's a good ramp payoff where playing 4 mana for a Chalice for 2, that gets you to 7 mana on turn 5. Late in the game, it can really boost your mana. And then you can play it on turn 2 and ramp to 4 mana on turn 3, and that's pretty cool. While also being a 0 mana artifact for the situations where you have 2 Glaze Fiends in play and you just want to get them dead. So it's a cool card. I wouldn't want to first pick it. It's funny. We have 2 first pick slots, and I don't feel like we've really used any of them yet.
Yeah, we're still in the common, so let's see how it goes. Next is Crusader of Odrick. This is 2 and a white for a star human soldier, and the Crusader's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. So this seems to be a nod to the green-white tokens deck that you mentioned before.
Yeah, it can fit in red-white as well. And this is another downshift, right? This is another card that was uncommon at the first time it was printed. And it's quite a strong card. I mean, it doesn't take much work to make this a 3 mana 5/5. One thing to note is this card dies in big combats a lot, where you attack with a 5/5 Crusader and a couple other creatures, and they're like, well, put a 3/3 on your Crusader, block down 2 other creatures. All of a sudden, it's like dominoes. But
that's right.
Still not really seeing anything that I'd be happy first picking.
Same.
But I guess if you had to, you could first pick a Neverflowing Chalice so far. I don't know. That's
where I would be, but yeah, hopefully we'll get it a little better. Next is Kazul's Toll Collector. This is 2 and a red for a 3/2 Ogre Warrior. It has an activated ability 0, like you pay 0 mana, and then attach target equipment you control to Kazul's Toll Collector. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery.
So one of the cool things about Double Masters, and it's true of most of the Master sets, is because they're just, they're all reprints, they're picking from Magic's history. They tend to really reemphasize the themes. There's very few cards in the set or in these packs that don't fit into one of the themes of the set, because they don't really have they don't really have a need not to do that. Like, they're able to just amp it up completely. So Kazul's Toll Collector is a mediocre card, but I just wanted to point out that almost every card in this pack, we're going to look at, plays into a theme, one theme or another. It's a fine card for red-white, but the equipment costs tend not to be so expensive that you need this. One cool combo, if you get Sunforger, the artifact that costs 3 to equip, and you can pay red, white, and unequip it to play a red or white instant from your deck. Mm-hmm. With, I think, cost 4 or less, something like that, or 3 or less. Kazul's Toll Collector plus Sunforger goes off. I have seen that happen.
Okay, that's kind of sweet. But yeah, like you said, not a particularly strong card overall. Next is Frogify, which is 1 and a blue for an enchantment or enchants a creature. The creature loses all abilities and is a blue frog creature with base power and toughness 1/1.
Yeah, no, it's playable card if you end up in blue. Another thing to mention, and when you're in the artifact decks, you're often going to end up in a spot where cards that aren't artifacts have a really high threshold to enter. Because once you've drafted a bunch of Fairy Mechanists and Sanctum Gargoyles, maybe some Glaze Fiends, a Master of Ethereum, all those cards, every time you put a non-artifact card into your deck, you really have to wonder, is this worth it? I'd rather have an Eager Construct than a better non-artifact card because it makes all my other cards better. Right. Frogify is the kind of card that, yes, it's worth playing a lot of the time, but often you'll trim it for a worse artifact just to kind of up your synergy counts.
That's right. Critical mass, especially with artifact-based decks, tends to be very, very important because there's a lot of searching through libraries or looking at certain number of cards or digging them back from the graveyard, and you need to have enough to make that work. And this next card, finally, a card I'd actually be happy about here is Fairy Mechanist. You just mentioned it. It's the 3 and a blue 2/2 flyer. It's an artifact creature, Fairy Artificer itself. So yeah, it's 3 and a blue, but it's also an artifact. And when it enters a battlefield, you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them and put it into your hand, and the rest go on the bottom in any order. You can chain these together. You can use it to basically get a 2-for-1 that's pretty darn reasonable. And critically, it's an artifact itself, so it can find more of itself, but also it triggers all of the stuff that you just mentioned. Get an artifact back from the yard. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, count the number of artifacts you have on the battlefield. It covers all of those.
Yeah, and this is the kind of card I'm thinking of when you're sitting there like, I've got 2 Abrades, a Reclamation Sage, and a Conclave Naturalist. I'm not going to lose to artifacts. And they're like, Fairy Mechanist, I'll reveal Sanctum Gargoyle. You're looking at your Abrade. You're like, I see.
I'm not going to be able to overwhelm you with my 1 removal spell.
Fairy Mechanist is also what makes me a lot less high on something like Sift, which is another blue common, a very powerful one. 3 and a blue sorcery, draw 3 cards, discard a card. This card was always one of the best blue commons when it's in a normal set, whereas in this set, there's a lot of ways to draw extra cards and accumulate value. And Fairy Mechanist is one that puts something on the board. So definitely a card I'd be interested in. And now that I've selected Fairy Mechanist, since we have 2 picks, that then retroactively makes me a lot happier with Everflowing Chalice as my nomination for my second pick. Obviously, we would hope to open something a little better once we get to rares and uncommons.
Yeah, if Chalice goes really well with the Mechanist, because you can play it on turn 2 and then run out the Fairy Mechanist on turn 3, or you can just find it with the Mechanist. So that's a nice either end of the spectrum there. So let's get to the uncommons. Our first one up, one of the most annoying cards ever printed, Lightning Greaves, 2 mana artifact equipment. Again, uncommon here. Equip creature has haste and shroud. And this is an old school ability that they don't actually print anymore, but it's hexproof from both players. It can't be targeted by spells or abilities. And the equip cost, and this is really critical here, it's 0 for Lightning Greaves. So you can cast your big powerful bomb, equip Lightning Greaves right away. Now any sorcery speed interaction that they had is off the table because your creature has Shroud, and it gives it haste so you can get in right away, attack, activate it, whatever it is that you need to do. The interesting thing is I almost never play Lightning Greaves. Even though the effect is annoying, I don't usually consider it strong enough on raw power level to include in my deck. Where are you at on Lightning Greaves in a set like this one?
I can definitively say it's worse than almost everyone thinks it is.
Yeah.
It is it's the kind of card that maybe you need to play with it. And, I've had the opportunity to do so in many iterations, including like original Mirrodin. Mm-hmm. It just does not perform. Not giving a stat boost means that it's not going to take a bad creature and make it good. It makes your good creatures better, but it doesn't stop instant speed removal if they have left mana up. It only helps, haste only helps if you have a good attack. It's just not a card I would advise you play most of the time. There's some equipment heavy decks that can make good use of it. It's good if you have a creature that has like a really powerful attack trigger, let's say. But yeah, Lightning Greaves is not where I'd want to be. And in general, you should think twice about including this card. I would not be interested in selecting it here.
Yeah, I never end up including it in these sets. I mean, I know that it was a commander staple for a really long time, so people might have experience with it there. Next is Yavamaya's Embrace. This is a doozy. It's 5 green, blue, 8 mana for an enchant creature aura. Again, uncommon. You control enchanted creature. So you get to just steal their creature, and you make it a little better. The creature gets +2/+2 and has trample.
Yeah,
man,
this
8
is the
mana
one
is a lot, but that is very powerful.
I'm not into taking these cards first. I have found the blue-green archetype to not be that good, first of all.
Okay.
And I'm certainly not going to take the payoffs before taking the enablers. So I'd rather have good ramp cards before I take the good payoffs, because there's a lot of pretty strong cards at like the 7-8 mana range, even at lower rarities here. So I would advise against taking Yavamaya's Embrace.
Yeah, very powerful, but my goodness sakes, that's a lot of mana.
Also, there's rarely more than one person at the table who wants this card. It's got restrictive color requirements and it costs 8 mana.
Yeah, you need to be in those colors and have ramp to play it. So there you go. The last uncommon is Dismantle, which is 2 and a red for a sorcery. Destroy target artifact. If that artifact had counters on it, put that many +1/+1 counters or charge counters on an artifact you control.
Yeah, it's a solid card. I mean, this is on balance worse than a Braid. Yes, sometimes you live the dream and you dismantle something that has like 3 counters on it, and you put 3 counters on your artifact creature and you just can't lose. But most of the time, this is just a sorcery speed 3 mana shatter, which, yeah, you can do better than that these days. So this doesn't take me away from any of the cards I've been looking at now. Also worth noting that red-blue is not a particularly supported archetype. So there's like this weird nominal theme of like trash for treasure and like ways to, Argivian restoration, ways to bring back artifacts from the graveyards to play with like discard outlets. I just don't really believe in it though. So I haven't been impressed. So
there seems to be a lot of that and a lot of copying or cloning going on.
There is a lot of cloning. There's Metamorph and Sculpting Steel in the set, and they're both quite powerful. But I'm not looking to take Dismantle. The other thing is, if there was like another good red card, I could see Dismantle being the pick. It's funny how the double first picks really push you to like try to line them up so you're taking 2 cards of the same color or theme.
Right.
But yeah, I'm not looking to take Dismantle here.
Our rares, and yes, I'll remind you, we get to pick 2 of these cards, and there's 2 rares and then 2 foils still to come as well. Our first rare is Vexin Shusher, which is it's a Gruul hybrid. It's 2 of those. So you can either pay red, green, or green, red to cast it. It's a 2/2 Goblin Shaman that cannot be countered. And you can pay a Gruul, so either a green or a red mana, as an activated ability to give that says target spell can't be countered. It's interesting, Luis. I remember when I first came back to Magic, Vexin Shusher was kind of a big deal, but this type of effect has really seemed to fallen out of favor for Constructed. It just doesn't feel like you really have time to fuss around with stuff like this anymore.
What? Don't you remember Prowling Serpopard dominating Standard just as everyone said it would?
Yeah. I remember everybody saying it would.
Yeah. I mean, Vexin Shusher is a constructed card, but also doesn't see playing constructed, which means it's just not a playable card. So yeah,
Right.
I mean, look, you'll play this in a Gruul deck if you need a 2/2 for 2. That's totally fine. It doesn't have a drawback, but it's just not a card where its card text is particularly relevant. So I'm out on Vexin Shusher.
All right. Our other rare is Twilight Mire. This is a land. We call these the filter lands. This one taps for colorless, or you can pay either a green or a black and tap it to add either green, black, or green, black to your mana pool.
Yeah, not a card I'm interested in first picking either. These lands are fine, but black-green's not a color combination I particularly like, and certainly don't want to take this over Fairy Mechanist plus Artifact, which is looking very likely to be our pick. I will say this is a very bad pack. We did not skillfully open a Double Masters pack. Like, you realize you can first pick Jace plus Mana Crypt in this set, right?
Yeah, I feel like we bricked, though we do have 2 foils, so let's see if we get there. Our first one, okay, this is some very powerful stuff. Basalt Monolith, all the way from Alpha, 3 mana artifact. It's an uncommon, it looks like here. Basalt Monolith doesn't untap during your untap step, but you can tap it to add 3 colorless mana, and you can pay 3 mana to untap it.
So it's kind of like a suspend 1, ritual. Like you pay 3 and you get nothing for it this turn. Mm-hmm. And then next turn, though, like just this by itself lets you play a 7-drop on turn 4. So clearly there's some powerful stuff going on here. Mm-hmm. So I keep going back and forth. Is Basalt Monolith even better than Everflowing Chalice?
It's probably better, yeah. It's in the ballpark, though. I mean, the fact is, as you pointed out, that the idea of using Basalt Monolith twice over the course of a game is a little ambitious. It's 3 mana to untap the thing. So you kind of get one awesome big shot. And then if the game is slow, or if you've bought yourself a bunch of time, then you can sink the mana into untapping it and using it again later. How good is that? Probably not amazing. Chalice is definitely in the ballpark.
Yeah, I think that the decks that want these are not always going to be the same decks. Like, if I was to take Fairy Mechanist, I'd rather take Chalice. I think that's a better combo because of what you said. You ramp 2 to 4 with Chalice, whereas Basalt Monolith's better when you're trying to cast 7s and 8s. It's better at casting 7s and 8s, but much worse at casting 4s and 5s.
Exactly.
So
yep.
It's a little bit more targeted card. I'm still on Mechanist Everflowing Chalice for what it's worth.
Okay. Our last card in the pack is our last foil as well. It's Chatter of the Squirrel. It's green mana source. It's green for a sorcery. Create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token, and you can flash it back for 1 and a green, which means cast it from your graveyard and then exile it after paying that cost. So you can net yourself a whole whopping 2 squirrels. Yeah,
I mean, it's you laugh, but this card I think is quite good in the tokens decks.
Okay,
because it lets you, even though it's 3 mana for 2 1/1s, which isn't great, 1 mana for a 1/1 gets you on the board quickly, and then you can flash it back later. So it lets you break up the cost in a decent way, and there's just a good amount of token payoff. So Chatter is obviously not going to be the cards we take, but I think it is quite a playable card. Yeah, I'm on Mechanist Chalice. I think it's defensible to go Mechanist Monolith if you wanted to do that, or Chalice Monolith and just aim for the stars. There's a couple different 7-drop colorless creatures that are pretty good in the set.
It's funny. My inclination is definitely Basalt Monolith, Everflowing Chalice. My gut says that if I was sitting at the table, I would take Mechanist plus Monolith. Yeah, I think I would end up taking Mechanist and Monolith. That's right.
I think any combination of Mechanist, Monolith, and Chalice seems fine to me. Mm-hmm. I would not take Yavamaya's Embrace here.
I think I would take Chatter of the Squirrel and Crusader of Odrick.
I mean,
the perfect 1, 2, 3.
It's possible that once we've drafted more, that is the highest equity pick out of the pack.
It's impossible, though, that once I've drafted more, I would actually do that, even if I knew it was the highest equity pick out of the pack.
Also,
I'm just not going to play a bunch of 1/1 Dirtles. One thing I did want to mention about the Monolith that we should, and it's kind of the tipping point for me on it, is yes, it is much better, as you mentioned, at casting like 6, 7, 8 mana spells, but it's also good at casting a 4-drop and a 3-drop on turn 4 or something, right? And, because you can just sort of say, okay, I'll use 2 of the colorless mana for this thing and the other colorless plus my lands for this thing. And, that can be really powerful too. Just double spelling on turn 4 with ultimately like maybe maybe 7 mana worth of stuff is really powerful, and it can overwhelm your opponent depending on how your deck goes. And then that's still maintaining that you could go like turn 4 Karn or whatever if you happen to get lucky and get one of those.
The other thing is there are also a couple cards that pay you off, well, actually more than a couple, for just having artifacts in play. So Monolith sitting in play tapped, you can sack it to a Ravenous Intruder. It makes your Master of Ethereum bigger. So it's not that it's a useless card even if you don't untap it.
They didn't put Wake Thrasher in this set, did they?
I don't believe so.
No, they didn't. I looked. Bummer. That's a combo.
Okay. So there is a mana reflection, gives you infinite mana with Basalt Monolith. I don't know what you do past that.
Yeah, that's cool. I wonder if there's just like a fireball or something. We could start the new website, Luis.
Mana reflection basalt monolith.com.
Fireball.com. Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's not the cleanest, the cleanest marketing. All right. So I came down on Mechanist plus Monolith. Are you, putting your stamp on, Mechanist plus Chalice here?
That's what I would do. Okay. But I think Mechanist Monolith is also quite defensible.
Okay. So there's our Crack-a-Pack. What about the, more specifics here for this master set?
All right. So it's funny. So I laid out the kind of 3 top commons by color, but you very quickly get to the point where it depends what deck you're drafting. And this is something that master sets tend to have a lot of, where you care more about what deck the person next to you is drafting than what colors they're drafting. I remember drafting green-white tokens at GP Las Vegas, one of the masters, and having someone drafting white to my right and someone drafting green to my left and not caring because we didn't want any of the same cards, basically. So the master sets have a lot of very specific cards, but the best commons also tend to be a little bit more general just because that's why they're the best. For white, I think the top 3 commons I have is Sanctum Gargoyle, Glint Sleeve Artisan, and Ancestral Blade. But I don't even think that is necessarily the order. I think Sanctum Gargoyle is the most powerful of them, but I suspect you'll be taking Glint Sleeve Artisan a lot because it goes well in all the go-wide token decks or like red-white or green-white, while also being perfectly good in any artifact deck. It makes an artifact, so it makes a lot of your synergies tick, while also 3 mana for 3/3 worth of stats one way or another. Sanctum Gargoyle, however, is a really powerful engine card. This is the kind of back-breaking card when your opponent just Sanctum Gargoyles back their Sword of Light and Shadow that you shattered. It's just like
should we read these, or I'm not sure.
These two I specifically mentioned earlier, but I'll read them in general. Yes.
Okay.
And
cool.
I think I already did talk about all 3 of these cards again, just to catch you up. I guess Glint Sleeve Artisans, 3 mana, 2/2, fabricate 1, so it either comes into play with a ++1 counter, or you get a 1/1 mirror artifact. Sanctum Gargoyles, 3 and a white for a 2/3 flyer, and when it ETBs, you return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand,
and it's an artifact. And
it's an artifact as well. And then the last one I have is Ancestral Blade, 1 and a white, +1/+1 equipment with equip 1, but it comes into play equipped onto a 1/1 white soldier token that it makes. So it's a 2 mana 2/2, but when it dies, it leaves behind this blade, which is pretty strong. And looking at, again, I mean, look at the white's commons. Everything is so targeted. You have like Angel of Dawn, 5 mana, 3/3 flyer, ETB, give all your creatures +1/+1 in vigilance. Fortify, it's the instant that gives all your creatures +2/+0 or +0/+2. And then the Crusader, which we saw earlier, which is as big as the number of creatures you control. Those are very heavily targeted towards the go-wide token decks.
For sure.
Whereas it has Remember the Fallen, 2 and a white, return a creature or an artifact or both from your graveyard to your hand. And this is often just a double raised dead in the artifact decks. So these cards are all fairly targeted. Oh, Thraben Inspector is actually, now that I'm thinking about it, is probably better than Ancestral Blade. Thraben Inspector is an amazing card. It makes an artifact. It's 1 mana for a 1/2. It makes a clue token, which is an artifact that you can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card. So it's good in the tokens decks because it's a 1 mana 1/2 that replaces itself, and good in the artifacts decks. So yeah, I actually would put Thraben Inspector in the top 3 and kick out Ancestral Blade. Thraben Inspector is just an amazing card. I think it's one of the sweetest Magic cards they've made. It's just such a well designed card. It really is,
especially given how easy it was to overlook at first.
Yeah,
it's really like jumped the power rankings all time more than almost any other card.
And so white has basically 2 main decks, which is equipment / go wide, and then artifact kind of nonsense where you're just trying to assemble and loop and get back artifacts and kind of get value. One common I want to mention is Crib Swap. This used to be an uncommon. It's 2 and a white. It's a It's an instant. It's actually a tribal instant. It counts as a shapeshifter in every zone, even though that doesn't really matter for the most part. But it exiles a creature and gives them a 1/1 creature that has that is also a shapeshifter. This is the kind of card that it's good to have one of in a lot of decks because it can handle their Shroom or their Send triplets or their Karthus, whatever their giant, monster is. But you don't really want too many. It's pretty bad to have this card against like the tokens deck, for example. Right. What are you going to do? Make their 3/3 into a 1/1, then they're going to cast all their creatures, get +2/+0. Right. So don't go nuts on this card. It's a fine card, but you don't want a lot of them. For blue, I like Fairy Mechanist as the best common. I think Fairy Mechanist is just an awesome card. It really gets your synergy stuff working while being card advantage. It's really easy to make a deck that just almost always hits with it. It really pulls its weight. There's also Parasitic Strix. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer, and it's an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a black permanent, it drains your opponent for 2. They lose 2 life. You gain 2 life.
Yeah, that adds up quickly. Also, there's a lot of blinking and copying and that kind of stuff going on if you can get the Strix rolling.
And it's a 3-mana 2/2 flyer. So you're not really losing out too much. Obviously, this set's powerful enough that a 3-mana 2/2 flyer by itself isn't good enough. But I tend to play this card a lot because it's an artifact, ticks all the boxes, and then if you end up with some black cards in your deck, it can really do some good work. And then third, kind of speaks to the format. I like Steel Sabotage.
Oh, wow. Crazy.
It's an instant for 1 blue mana. So just 1 mana, counter target artifact spell or return target artifact to its owner's hand, from play. So the reason I like this is yes, there is Sift. That card's awesome. There's Argivian Restoration.
Cloud Reader Sphinx. Yeah.
Yeah, return an artifact from a graveyard to your battlefield, Cloud Reader Sphinx. There's all these powerful cards. I haven't found Double Masters decks to be short on ways to draw cards or good late game cards.
So you're looking for efficiency.
And Steel Sabotage is a 1-mana counterspell or 1-mana bounce spell against a lot of the format. The downside is you play against like a red-green deck, it might just be dead. Or a blue-green deck or something. Really, any green deck has the possibility. But when you play against an Esper deck, this is just going to be one of the best cards in your deck. Also, you can bounce your own artifacts. So even in the instances where it's dead against their deck, you can get value of bouncing or saving one of your own artifacts. And you're just not short on ways to spend lots of mana. And in fact, I don't think I've played a Cloud Reader Sphinx yet, and I've drafted blue a bunch of times because there's just better things to do for that much mana usually, and it's not an artifact.
People are going to be taking those, yeah.
Yeah. So blue, again, strong, really just a strong artifact theme. That's all there is to it. There's also the ramp theme. They have a Apprentice Wizard is 1 blue 0/1. You can pay a blue and tap it to add 3 colorless mana to your mana pool.
That's insane, and there's no restriction on what you can spend it on either.
No, this ramps you hard. Also, it's new Richard Kane Ferguson art, which is cool.
Which is
you don't
awesome.
see that very often.
It's a really nice looking card, yeah.
One note is Brainstorm's a common. If you don't have ways to shuffle or get cards off the top of your deck, this card's mediocre. And I just want to mention it because Brainstorm's a powerhouse in all these constructed formats, best card in Legacy, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people are going to overvalue it as a result. You should usually not play this card. It doesn't fit in most decks.
Yep, it usually doesn't even make the cut, especially if blue-red isn't, heavy spells matter or whatever.
So black's another one of the more split colors where it feeds into the Jund theme and the artifact theme. The best black common I think is Cast Down, just a clean 1 and a black instant destroy target non-legendary creature. It can kill artifact creatures. It can kill basically anything except of course legends, of which there are a fair amount. Sometimes this won't kill the 2 best creatures in their deck, and that sucks. But this can kill a lot of stuff, and at just 2 mana is definitely worth it. So it's a card I don't mind taking early, even if it's not an artifact. It also goes in both the artifact theme decks or the Jund theme decks. It tends to be better in the Jund decks because the artifact decks really just have such a low capability of playing non-artifact cards in their deck that sometimes even Cast Down, you're like, yes, I'll play this card, but I kind of wish I just took an artifact over it because the next best non-artifact card I could play is also pretty good. Executioner's Capsule kind of gets around that. That's our next card. It's 1 black mana for an artifact, and you can pay 1 and a black and tap and sack it to destroy a non-black creature. So
how surprised would you be if that jumped Cast Down?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think early you'd want Cast Down because it's so much more efficient outside of the decks that care about artifacts. But imagine you first picked Sanctum Gargoyle plus a Thraben Inspector, just 2 white cards, but with a Sanctum Gargoyle. I would want to take Executioner's Capsule over Cast Down already, because Sanctum Gargoyle, getting back your removal spells is really good.
Yes.
And this is a 1-mana artifact that kind of hangs out in play, which can buff a lot of your other cards. So this card is quite good. And it's also good outside the artifact decks, because it's 1 black, destroy any non-black creature, and you can split it up so you can play it off just 1 swamp, etc. Yeah,
the little things add up really quick when it comes to these things. You mentioned being able to get it back. You can find it with the Mechanist. It lets your Parasitic Strix trigger. Like, there's so many stupid little things that you go, oh, okay. And you start to see that even though Executioner's Capsule is much less efficient than a card like Cast Down, there's many decks where it's actually just better.
Yeah, and it doesn't take much, like you said, to put it over the finish line.
Right. What about the third card?
So this is one which I think is going to be a deceptively powerful card for a lot of people. It's Twisted Abomination.
Oh yeah, this was a rare originally, right?
No, it was a common when it first got printed.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Back in Scourge, but
I'm thinking of it from it was a time.
It was a time shifted uncommon. It was a time shifted card in Time Spiral, so it showed up in that weird time shifted slot,
that's
which is what you're thinking of.
Yep.
Anyway, it's 5 and a black for a 5/3 zombie mutant, so 6 mana 5/3, and you can pay a black to regenerate it. So it's a 6 mana 5/3 that's pretty hard to kill. But the reason it's so good is it has swamp cycling of 2 mana, which means you can pay 2 and discard it to go get a swamp. So this is a 2 mana. This can go get you a land for 2 mana. And when you cast it, a 6 mana 5/3 regenerator is actually really, really potent.
It's a pain. It's really hard.
Surprisingly good.
Yes.
You don't see regeneration much in most sets because it's a kind of annoying ability. You can pay a mana to basically save it from death. This card's kind of unstoppable sometimes.
It can be. Yeah. The green red cannot kill this.
No. And the cool thing about Twisted A-Bomb is it self-splashes. So one of my favorite things to do is, let's say you're playing like a blue-green deck, but you really need another removal spell. You can splash Cast Down Twisted A-Bomb and like a swamp. And if you draw the swamp, you can cast the Twisted A-Bomb. If you don't, you can just cycle this to go get the swamp.
Yes.
It's really sweet.
It's really sweet. Yeah, this was in Eternal Masters as well. And it was very good there too. I remember leaning on this in the exact way that you described.
Yeah. So I just want to highlight that card because it is better than it looks. It is one of those cards that really overperforms. This card saw constructed play back in the day in block.
Did it really?
Yeah, you could just go get lands with it early, and then later, some decks just couldn't deal with it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so the black commons are a little lighter on the artifact theme than blue for sure, and kind of comparable with white, though I think even lighter because some of the artifact cards in black, like Glaze Fiends 1 and a black for an 0/1 flyer, whenever an artifact ETBs under your control, it gets +2/+2. This card's not playable in a lot of the artifact decks because it's just a hyper aggressive card. That's all it does. And then like Defiant Salvager is a 3 mana 2/2 where you can sack an artifact or creature to put a +1/+1 counter on it, but only as a sorcery. Again, this card lends itself to more aggressive decks than some. So I've found the artifact decks to be more clustered in blue-white, though there are certainly black aspects to them. And then moving on to red, easily the best red common is a Braid. 1 in a red, instant, deal 3 to a creature or destroy target artifact. This is the artifact removal that's never dead, always kills something, almost always kills just about every card that you care about. In fact, it misses
absurd.
on 5/5s, but not if they're artifacts, which a lot of the 5/5s in this set are.
And it's a common now where it used to be uncommon.
Just very, very powerful. Lightning Axe, another good common. It's red is an instant. As an additional cost, you can either discard a card or pay 5 mana. So it's either 6 mana or 1 mana plus discard a card, but it deals 5 to a creature for just 1 mana.
Yeah. And
it's really hard to beat that efficiency. What's going to happen a lot with this is you discard a card if you're not in a position to pay, and then later in the game, you just start being able to pay for it. And sometimes it hurts. Sometimes you have to discard a spell or your 5th land to kill something. But 1 mana to kill anything with 5 or less toughness is a really powerful ability. And then past that, actually the commons get a lot worse, unsurprisingly. I like Rapacious Dragon, 4 in a red for a 3/3 flyer. When it ETBs, you get 2 treasure tokens that are artifacts that can sack to add 1 mana of any color. Putting 2 artifacts into play is pretty nice. getting two treasures means next turn you can cast almost anything. Also, sometimes you just play this and immediately play a 2-drop, so it was like a 3-mana 3/3 flyer. And the thing is that's a little awkward is it doesn't really fit in most Artifact Matters decks. I just don't think red blue's that good. And it's a little expensive for the tokens deck. So a lot of the time you're not going to take this third. You're going to take like, Orcish Vandal is a 1 and a red for a 1/1 that taps to sack an artifact, deal 2 to any target. Like you get a bunch of Ichor Wellsprings and Chromatic Stars, this card becomes better. Or you're going to take the Toll Collector we mentioned earlier because you're actually playing the equipment deck.
Right.
Green, the best common, I think in general is Conclave Naturalist. This is the 4 in a green for the 3/5 fly or 4/4. 4 in a green for 4/4 to ETBs destroys an artifact or enchantment. So 5 mana 4/4 usually will kill one of their better cards.
Yep.
And
that's amazing.
It costs 5, so it has some diminishing returns, but 5-drops that catch you up on the board tend to have a little more leeway than others. I also like Koslex Predator a lot. 3 in a green for a 3/3 that puts 2/0/1 spawns into play, and they can sack to add a colorless. Yeah. So it's 3 mana for a 3/3 that puts 2 0/1s into play that helps with your go wide stuff or with your ramp stuff because this just ramps you up to 7 mana next turn.
Yeah, it is worth noting that those they are colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens, but they are not in fact artifacts. Even though
good point, yeah,
we're kind of used to seeing that, but yeah.
And then like the other colors, like Sylvan Might's a good third best common, 1 in a green instant, give a creature +2/+2 and trample until end of turn, and then it flashes back for 2 green. So a pretty powerful combat trick, but sometimes you'll take Might of the Masses over it. 1 mana instant, give a creature a +1/+1 for each creature you control. And sometimes you'll take Whisper of the Wilds, 1 in a green O2 that taps for a green or taps for double green if you have a 4-power creature. It really just depends where you're going. Green is almost always ramping. I think that's the most strong part, the most that it offers, but it can be part of various Jund decks or the green-white acceleration or green-white tokens deck. That deck's also quite good. So one thing I want to note, Clear Shot's also a fine green common, 2 in a green instant, give a creature +1/+1 until end of turn, and then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control.
Right.
So I think that one key thing in this format that really will help you is you should either be playing a lot of artifacts, like you're an Esper, Esper flavored deck, one of those combinations or all 3 with a lot of artifacts, or you should be playing almost no artifacts. The worst position to be in is to be like, I'm a blue-green deck, but I have 4 artifacts in my deck, all of which are pretty expensive. Because what happens then is you turn on all your opponent's shatters. Either overload their shatters and just accept the fact their shatter is going to be good,
right?
And just have your 16 artifact deck where you're just whatever, they get to play some removal spells, or play none and strand those cards in their hand. But the worst case scenario is you don't play an artifact until turn 5. You pay 5 mana for an artifact that they can just kill, and you don't get value out of it. There are plenty of artifacts that give you value, so even if they're killed, so it's fine to play those. Like for example. Putting something like Clone Shell in your deck. It's a 5 mana 2/2, but when it enters the battlefield, you get to look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile 1 face down under Clone Shell. And then when it dies, if you turn that card face up, and if it's a creature, it's just in play. You get to put it into play. So Clone Shell's fine, because if they shatter Clone Shell, you get a creature out of it. I would play that with no other artifacts in my deck and be fine with it. What I really don't want to do is put a Cathodian in my deck, a 3 mana 3/3 that when it dies add 3 colorless. That's just asking to get shattered,
Right.
That's
and like you said, the name of the game is making sure that if your opponent is shatter heavy, and we're using shatter as a shorthand for all of the destroy target artifact specific effects, if you can brick all of those, you can give yourself a huge advantage.
Yeah. And there are a lot of artifacts that provide value, so you wouldn't be surprised if you ended up with some of those in your deck. I just want to caution you away from ending up in a situation where one of your 5 artifacts in your deck, gets shattered and you're losing out on that exchange. I'd rather try to minimize completely or just overload it. You don't want to end up in the middle. Being in the middle kind of gets you kicked by both sides.
Right.
There's tons of removal in this format. There's a lot of really strong removal spells. You want to recalibrate a little bit. You don't want to open your pack, see a lightning axe and a cast down and be like, sweet, 2 removal spells. We're doing it. Because again, you're going to run into someone playing a Planeswalker or a Sword or a Sanctum Gargoyle. Like I mentioned Sanctum Gargoyle a lot because it's the card that really, kind of clowns on a lot of these other cards.
It really does. The combo of Fairy Mechanist and Sanctum Gargoyle they're often together. They were in I believe it was the original Modern Masters set that they were together in. And the blue-white deck in that format was similar to what seems like every deck is in this format, which is an artifact-based theme. But the engines that you can get rolling with those, card advantage-wise, and we are talking about spells going into your hand here as well, either from the graveyard or from your library, can easily overwhelm a spot removal spell. They do not get the job done. I mean, it's like, just to sort of put it on its head, if anybody ever uses a spot removal spell on your Fairy Mechanist or on your Sanctum Gargoyle, you're like, sweet, right? Like, you're like, I'm not going to lose this game, right? If you shatter my guy.
You're feeling good about that situation because you both spent mana and you still have a good card left. Not even just a card, a good card.
Right. So the key there is to not be on the wrong end of that.
The other thing is, like, Sift is a common, and it's not even one of the best commons.
Right.
It's a good common, but that tells you a lot about a format. You don't want to be the person showing up with a bunch of Doomblades when your opponent's got a bunch of Sifts. So this is part of the reason I don't like the Jund decks that much. I'd rather be red, white, or green, white and just beat the opponent down and let them die with Sift in their hand. I don't think that the Jund decks have the tools to go toe to toe against the artifact blue decks in a long game for the most part. Obviously, you can draft a great Jund deck and it can grind these decks out. But that hasn't been my experience. I think the artifact synergies are very, very strong.
Yeah, the equipment, you mentioned it briefly that they could have a sword, right? One of the, think of the mythic rare, Sword of Fire and Ice or whatever. But there's also just all of those equipment that we talked about before, and any of the higher end equipment can have a similar function where you're using your 1/1 removal spells on their creatures, and they have a really good equipment laying around, and then any creature ends up being a threat, and you're never going to be able to outpace that unless, of course, you're actually killing the equipment itself. So,
I mean, look at Cranial Plating, right? It's the 2 mana equipment that gives a creature +1/+0 for each artifact you control and has equip 1 or equip double black, which you can do at instant speed. Mm-hmm. When you play against a heavy artifact deck that plays out Everflowing Chalice, Cranial Plating, an Ichor Wellspring, which is a 2 mana artifact that ETB draws a card, and when it dies, you draw a card. Mm-hmm. So not only is it a card that's resistant to shatter, because it's just actually bad for the opponent if they do. So that's just going to stay in play until they draw a sack outlet. So when you have a Cranial Plating that's giving +4/+0, and then your opponent's like, I'll play Glint Sleeve Artisan and I'll choose to Fabricate. I'll make a 1/1 mirror. Now my Cranial Plating is actually giving +5/+0. What are you going to cast down my Artisan and then, Lightning Axe my 1/1? Like, sure, if you have an Abrade and you can kill the Cranial Plating, that does solve the problem to a degree. But there's so many equipment. What if they just play a Skinwing, 4 mana, 2/2 flying equipment, or 4 mana equipment that gives +2/+2 and flying, and then it comes into play on a Germ? You can't ignore it because it eventually will kill you. But if you kill it, they still have the Skinwing sitting in play.
Exactly, and then that's before we even start talking Sanctum Gargoyle here.
Right. Also, I mean, just imagine trying to play a removal deck when Sphinx Summoner is an uncommon. 3 blue black, 3/3 flyer, ETB, search for another artifact creature and put it in your hand.
Yes.
Like, I've had decks with multiple Sphinx Summoners and Sanctum Gargoyle, and removal's a joke. So it's not to say that Cast Down's a bad card. It's a good card. What I'm trying to say is if you have removal in your deck, you need to use it to supplement whatever good thing your deck is doing. It can't just be in and of itself the good thing, which is not true in every format. You can draft, in a lot of formats, red, black, 7 removal spells, 8 removal spells, and have a pretty good deck and just kill them with whatever scraps you need. Like Theros was great even with all the escape cards in the format. Right. It's just not going to fly in this format. The recursion engines are too powerful.
Yeah, but strategically speaking, that usually leads me to think in terms of pushing the boundaries on the synergies in my deck rather than going for individual or sort of traditional card power level stuff. Hey, this is a great removal spell. I'll take it. Okay, this path starts to lead you down a pile of really strong cards, which can absolutely win in a core set or even an expert level draft, depending. But here, these are the sets that are probably the most synergistic of all draft formats, even more so than Cube, where, you mentioned a couple of cards when you were just talking now, what's it called? The 2 mana artifact draw card, and then when it dies, you draw a card. Yeah, Ichor Wellspring, right? That card does nothing. right? It's just 2 mana artifact, draw a card. And you'll find that those type of cards pull way more than their weight. You can find them with Mechanist, you can get them back, you can sacrifice them for value. They enter the battlefield as an artifact, so that'll trigger something. They are an artifact on the battlefield, so that'll add to your count or whatever. Even though that card in a vacuum looks completely overlookable, or maybe if you're ambitious, you're like, maybe I'll sacrifice it and draw an extra card, right? So then for all of this effort, you're up 1 card. It's not really what this card's about. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. This is why we talked about some of the less impactful cards. I mean, it ended up coming up in our discussion of Everflowing Chalice that sometimes you just play it for 0 mana to get an artifact to enter the battlefield or be on the battlefield. This is a format where a card like that, or Flare Husk that we mentioned in our Crack-a-Pack, as a fairly minimal impact card, actually could matter a lot more. And just look past the normal value kind of things that you go for in a typical limited deck or whatever. These are the ones where when somebody comes running up and says, I got this sweet mythic and a bunch of removal, you go, okay, that's fine. And when somebody comes up and goes, 20 of my 23 cards are artifacts, you go, you're going to win the draft. Like it almost, as long as you have some type of payoffs and some type of structure to it at all, you're going to be in an amazing position to take down the draft.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind, because there is just a bunch of just extremely powerful stuff going on here. And you want to make sure you're harnessing that rather than approaching it like you would a normal limited format. This is closer to cube than it is whatever the last set you drafted is. Yeah,
I'm into it, man. This set looks super sweet. So big picture takeaways for people who are going to be playing in an event. Number 1, artifacts, right? This is your artifact master set. So when you sit down to do your draft, be very aware that being in an artifact specific deck is a good place to be. And if the people around you are unaware of this fact, take advantage and just move in and do the artifact thing. By the time this set gets to the end, obviously artifact decks are going to be everywhere just because there's 100 of them in the set, but you're not going to be seeing the type of cards available, the key payoff cards. Another takeaway from any master set, this also counts for some other sets, but masters are where they really shine, are the pivot cards, as we call them, the in-between multiple archetypes cards. Those ones end up going up in value and being the ones that you need to prioritize early, because if you don't take them, you won't get them later. A good example would be like a Sanctum Gargoyle or something like that, where there's other decks that can take advantage of what Sanctum Gargoyle is doing, at least to a point where when you look at a card like Ichor Wellspring, there's probably not that many decks that are super interested in it unless they are doing heavy artifact themed stuff. Same thing with cards like Flare Husk and the more minimal impact cards that you would normally overlook that go up. Think about those type of cards. The ones that are good in multiple archetypes. Glint Sleeve Artisan is another great example, right? It has +1/+1 counter synergies. It has token synergies and it has artifact synergies as well as go wide synergies. So there's probably 3 decks that want as many Glint Sleeve Artisans as they can possibly get. And if you happen to be in one of those decks, you are going to have to prioritize it over even cards that look more powerful, like a removal spell or something, because other decks are going to snap those up. So make sure that you focus on the big picture stuff with the artifact sub-themes, and then drilling down a little bit on tiebreaker picks or tougher picks. Take the cards that other archetypes also will want and hope to wheel the ones that are more specific to your archetype.
Yeah, I think that, when you look at Double Masters, all these cards have their purposes, but the cards, like you said, the bridge cards are very, very important. The cards that everyone wants, well, clearly those are earlier picks, but the cards that can really dodge between archetypes or straddle multiple archetypes tend to be really strong as a result, just because they're so desired. And, you do, just like every set, you do want to find what's open. You don't want to force things. So being able to keep open a little bit longer can also be a pretty good reward as well.
Yep. And then also remember that these cards, especially if you're drafting in real life, or if you're doing one of the Magic Online events that's not a Phantom, look up the prices. Like, no, you don't have to know a full sheet of prices or whatever, but these are going to be expensive events to enter. And you don't want to open up some foil card that you just have no idea that every commander player ever wants one. And cause you might not play it or whatever. And, you don't want to, be the one who ends up passing a card worth $100 or whatever, when you're spending $50 a draft or 25 on Magic Online. So just have an idea of some of the more desirable cards before you go in. That's just a practicality.
One last note: the Tron lands, so Urza's Power, Urza's Tower, Urza's Power Plant, Urza's Mine are common, and these are the lands where if they each tap for a colorless, but if you get all three, they tap for 2, 2, and 3 respectively.
Right.
The Tron decks seem horrible. Like, they seem like a lot of fun, and when they come together, it's awesome. When you get 2 of one piece and 3 of the 2 other pieces plus an expedition map, you could just do big things. In general, most of the people I've seen go for Tron don't get there, and I've tried to go for it and abandon ship. It's sweet. It's the dream, obviously. If you really start jamming on this format, Marshall, I expect you to try and draft Tron more than you should because it's so sweet.
Oh, I will for sure, yeah.
But my advice in general is that it's not going to be as fruitful as you might hope.
Okay, well, I'm definitely going to try it. One last thing I wanted to touch on with you, big picture wise, for people sitting down to do the draft is, so they get to pick 2 cards out of the first pack, excuse me. Would you expect that more often this ends up being just the 2 most powerful cards available, or do you think that it's going to be 2 cards that complement each other more often? And if so, how would that affect the decks that we're going to see in the format?
I believe it's most likely to be the most powerful card in the pack plus the card that works best with that card. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that won't be the case, but when you really don't want to, what you don't want to do, like I said, is do something like take Fairy Mechanist plus Cast Down. I would be more inclined to do something like take Fairy Mechanist plus like a decentish artifact to try to keep that theme going. Like Fairy Mechanist Parasitic Strix, I think would be a lot more appealing to me than Fairy Mechanist plus Cast Down. Okay. Obviously, once the power level gap gets too much, I'm not taking Fairy Mechanist plus Eager Construct. I'll take the Cast Down at that point. But if the best card you take is, for example, an 8, you're mostly better off taking a 6 that works with it rather than a 7 that doesn't.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's going to end up playing out as well, because one of the things that you don't notice right away, right, is that with the 2 foils and the 2 rares in the pack, yes, they get to take the 2 best and or most valuable cards out of the pack, but you're going to get past some absurd stuff, right? I mean, there could be a pack with 3 rares in it and they just can't take all 3 of them. Or, they take 2 synergy-based picks and you get shipped 2 amazing power level cards, even though they're individual power level cards, but they're still amazing, right? It's really rare in regular booster draft to get past like an amazing card. Like people just take them, right? It's like, It's usually only in the 3rd pack that happens.
You're not getting past a Sword of Fire and Ice or a Jace or a Mana Crypt very often.
Right.
You could be, especially at something like Jace, which is a double blue card. You end up the person passing to use green-white tokens, especially if it's a Phantom Draft. I guess if it's not a Phantom Draft, you're just not going to get past a Jace. But
right, then that's not happening.
If it's a Phantom Draft, that could easily happen. And when you're in that spot, you're just lucky. But for the most part, you're not going to get past these 10s.
Right. So keep that in mind. You're not going to get like the super stuff, but you are going to be past way more powerful stuff than you're used to, given the fact that there's the double rares plus the double foils in the pack as well. You will see stuff sneak through that you're like, wow, this is awesome. I got hooked up. And that can actually happen in this format. Okay, Lewis, let's call it a show here. I know you've got some type of smoker.
So actually,
how is it coming along?
So before the show, I was showing Marshall. I knew he would like this. I got a new meat thermometer where it's got a bunch of prongs or the little thermometers, and it's wireless. So right now, I'm literally this instant checking on how my brisket's doing. It didn't hit the temp 195 that I needed to take it out. I'm making burnt head, so I'm going to take it out at 195, cube it, sauce it, put it back in for about another 2 hours, probably hour and a half. Mm-hmm. But if it hit 195 during the show, we would actually have to like take a quick break for me to do all that. Didn't get there, so we're safe.
Well,
but
what's
I'm
it
keeping
at?
an eye on it. It's still actually 175. This
okay.
one's going really slow. It's so weird. I had to cut the brisket I had into two pieces. One was thinner than the other, and the thicker one is way behind. So as these things tend to be. So one of them's already
cut the
out.
thinner one up, right?
The thinner one already got cut. I actually had a Raptor, Josh Utterlayton, on deck to test and cut it out and take it out. But the whole like cutting and saucing and mixing process I wanted to do myself because that's a little bit much to ask rather than just, hey, take this out at this time.
That's amazing. Okay, well, I'm glad we didn't let the burn ends get actually burned because that's not the idea.
No, they're good.
All right, well, let's call it a show here. Good luck to everybody who's playing in these Double Masters events. I mean, these formats, again, tend to be some of the best limited experiences that they put out. The only downside to them is they're so expensive. It's hard to keep drafting them over and over, but they are really, really sweet. And I know that the people at Wizards that make them do not view these as just a big pile of reprints that they're shoving out into the world. They spent a lot of time on the limited sets, and they've come up with some real all-time classics along the way, and hopefully this will be one of them as well. If you want to find us on social media to show us your picks or what decks you ended up doing, you can do that. It's Marshall_LR for me, and for Luis, it's LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And as we mentioned at the top, if you check out Channel Fireball, if you head over there and you end up signing up for CFB Pro or buying anything, we would love it if you'd use our affiliate code LR. All you have to do is just put LR in, and then that'll let them know that you're an LR listener and that, we're the ones that sent you over there, that kind of thing. And it helps us out to help support the show as well. So please do that. We do appreciate it. That's going to do it for this episode of the show. We'll see you next week.
So this actually was going to be my sign off last week, but because of the scheduling issues, you ended up wrapping the show. What did you do for the sign off, by the way?
What did I do? I did something fantastic. It was amazing. I don't remember what it was. So maybe it wasn't that great. All
right. Well, maybe I'll check it out to refresh your memory or what have you. But actually, I wanted to talk a little bit about a friend of mine, Gabe Walls. We got news that he passed away now about a week and a half ago. If you play Magic and started playing, or following the competitive scene in the last couple of years, you probably won't have heard of him. He's a little bit older school than that. Gabe, he got second at U.S. Nationals. He has like a PT top 8, extremely skilled player. Actually, a lot of people have him, and maybe among the top 20 or so limited players of all time. He was quite gifted at that. And I just want to share some Gabe stories because he's one of the most unique individuals I'd ever met. He was a little before your time, Marshall. I know that you didn't really get a chance to interact with him.
That's right.
Gabe was a wild dude. So I met Gabe in something like 2008. Yeah. And it was funny because I had read about him. His a lot of his Magic accomplishments were before I came on the scene, and I played a draft against him. And the whole time I thought I was losing. The cards were saying I was winning, but I thought I was losing because of the way Gabe was acting. He's just like, he's cackling. He looks like he's got everything going. I was quite intimidated. I did end up beating him, but playing against Gabe, especially, if the game's in any way close, can be really tough. He was but he was a really funny dude. He always had a smile on his face. He had a great sense of humor. And, there's a lot of Gabe stories I actually couldn't tell on the podcast. He's got a lot going on. And, but some of the good ones I remember are at one point, Huey and Eric Froelich were watching a baseball game, and the game was going into extra innings, and then it got rained out. And then when they started playing it again, it was again just continued, tied. And at one point, Gabe bet Huey that the game would never end. He literally bet Huey $100 that the game would never end.
What?
And he was like, okay. And then Ifro explained to Gabe how that just wasn't possible, the things that would have to happen. And Gabe offered a buyout of $90. So he paid Huey $90 to buy out.
He just basically took $90 and handed it to Huey.
Yes. And another betting story for Gabe is he This was when Ben has told me this one, when they were testing for the Mirrodin Pro Tour, one of Ben's first top 8s actually, they were testing the Affinity Mirror, and at one point Gabe said, this is how many matches we played, and Ben's like, what? There's no way you played that many matches. Gabe's like, do you want to bet? And Ben's like, yeah. And Gabe's like, okay, you win, and hands him $20. so he like routinely would make these bets where he would lose as soon as they made the bet, but he offered it to try to kind of intimidate the other person into backing down. But to Gabe's credit, he always paid off. You know, a lot of people who will be like, you want to bet? And then you say yes. They're like, oh, I actually don't want to bet.
Yeah.
Gabe was not like that. He would bet. I remember we once went down to LA to play a Star City Open, and Gabe convinced us instead to go to Six Flags. So we just went. A bunch of us drove down to LA, rented a Airbnb for the weekend, and instead of playing in the tournament we went to, we ended up going to Six Flags. And of course, at Six Flags you can pay like an extra $80 a person to get the thing that lets you skip the lines. Uh-huh. Of course, we bought that. Gabe convinced us to do that.
That's amazing. Just spew weekend.
So I mean, like I said, Gabe was a complicated guy. Those who know him, he wasn't on good terms with most of the people in his life. Mm-hmm. I hadn't spoke to him. I hadn't seen him in about 5 years. I'd spoke to him a time or two, and those were not pleasant interactions. He had some addiction issues. Gabe ended up going, he was on the upswing from what I know from the people who knew him, kind of near when he passed. But he certainly, his life went off the rails, and that was a real shame, because he actually provided a lot of guidance to a bunch of young men in Magic. Even though Gabe didn't know what he was doing really either, he had a lot of leadership in him. And there was a lot of Magic players who kind of he had this gamer house that he had rented as a mansion in Indianapolis, and he paid for a lot of it, and he kind of gave a lot of dudes. A lot of people you would recognize now, Michael Jacob, Jerry T, Nate Price, who works for Wizards. These are a lot of the guys in that orbit. And Gabe did his best. He really gave a lot to those guys. And the thing about Gabe is he had a lot of grifts going on. That was his personality. That's where Gabe was coming from. You always knew that. Yeah. There was a time in my life where if Gabe asked me for $10,000, I would have given it to him without a second thought. Then there was a time in my life when he asked me for $100 and I wouldn't,
Right.
And both those things existed. But at the end of the day, Gabe was a really positive influence on my life. I do miss him. I already missed him. And I was hoping he would come out the other end of it and we'd be friends again. Didn't end up happening, and I'm really sorry about that. But there's a lot of good memories involving Gabe, and I kind of wanted to share a few of them.